And now, on with the opera. Let joy be unconfined. Let there be dancing in the streets, drinking in the saloons, and necking in the parlor. Play, Don.
It's the Marx Brothers Council Podcast, episode 89, A Night at the Opera, Reorchestrated. Happy New Year, Marx Brothers friends. I know it's very late in the month to be saying Happy New Year, but this is our January episode. We haven't spoken to you yet this year, and although it may seem to the untrained eye that we are wishing you a Happy New Year a month late, we are actually doing it 11 months early. So let's get to the new year. Let's knock on the hollow tree where my co-host Matthew Conium sits, writing books, reading books. Is there anything he won't do with books? Let me be the first to say Happy New Year, Matthew.
Happy New Year, Noah. Yeah, I don't eat them.
Oh, really? Well, you should try them. I would suggest lightly seasoned and lightly frizzled. And floating in the air like a vapor is our producer, Bob Gassell, who will now say something incredibly funny that he will think of, record, and edit in later, to be followed by the reactions Matthew and I will now provide in advance. 1, 2, 3.
I so enjoy working with you guys.
Oh, Bob, why did you say that? That's a terrible thing to say. God, boy, that really brought the mood down, but we're going to try to press on. Ugh. All right. Can we just be serious for a moment, please?
That's what Thalberg said.
For more than a year now, we have been devoting approximately every third episode to revisiting each of the Marx Brothers films by listening and responding to commentaries submitted by you, our brilliant listeners. We did this with The Coconuts. We did this with Animal Crackers. We did it with Monkey Business, with Horse Feathers. We did it with Duck Soup. And some of our sharper listeners have already figured out that we are now turning your critical eye to A Night at the Opera and our critical eye to your critical eye. Eyes on all of us as we dive in, which I suppose we should get to right now. We're going to start with some commentary from friend of the show and past guest, Mr. Anthony Strand.
When I was in high school, I didn't love A Night at the Opera. You know all the standard lines. It's not really about the Marx Brothers. It doesn't have enough zany antics. The songs are unmemorable. It's just some boring romance about two dull people I don't care about. I used to say this stuff to anybody who would listen. As I entered college and in my 20s and 30s, I became more and more of a fan of classic Hollywood. And that's when I saw other romantic comedies of the 30s without the Marx Brothers in them. And that's when I realized that A Night at the Opera, no, it's not in the tradition of the Marx Brothers Paramount movies, but it is in the tradition of other 1930s musical comedies without the Marx Brothers in them. And there's a lot of great ones. The Paramount movies that it's much more like are the romantic comedies made by Ernst Lubitsch and Ruben Mamelian. I'm thinking of things like Mamelian's Love Me Tonight and Lubitsch's 1 Hour with You and the Smiling Lieutenant, which are these very sweet romances with these big lavish song numbers involving a huge cast of singers and dancers. And really, like, that's what the songs are in A Night at the Opera. Alone and Così Cosa are both those kind of, these big numbers. You can see the money on screen, and that's very entertaining, just a different kind of entertaining than Monkey Business and Horse Feathers are. Also, Ernst Lubitsch with Maurice Chevalier and Jeanette MacDonald went to MGM around the same time and made one of these, The Merry Widow. So clearly this was another Paramount trend that MGM wanted to emulate. It also reminds me a lot of the backstage musicals Busby Berkeley was making at Warner Brothers. You know, things like 42nd Street, Gold Diggers of 1933, Footlight Parade, and the Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers movies at RKO, like Shall We Dance and Top Hat. Rosa especially is very much in the mold of the characters played by Ginger Rogers and Ruby Keeler in those movies. They're dancers instead of singers, but it's very much this same kind of sweetheart performer looking for her big break. All of those movies are wonderful. The jokes are funny. The songs and dances are extremely impressive. And A Night at the Opera, if it was a straight musical comedy starring Alan Jones and Kitty Carlisle, it would be a good example of that genre. They're a charming couple with real chemistry. And again, they go all out for the songs. Both of those songs are so much more impressive than I would have given them credit for when I was younger. So the truth is that the Marx Brothers aren't really invading the opera. What they're invading is the musical comedies and musical romances of the 1930s. That's what makes their scenes in A Night at the Opera so magical. People say the Marx Brothers have been reined in at MGM. They haven't, not really. They still act like themselves. They're causing chaos. They've just been put in a new context. And that context happens to be a top-shelf studio entertainment. The Marx Brothers elevate it to another level. I love A Night at the Opera more than I love those other movies because it has the Marx Brothers in it doing their thing, and that makes it better. This is a trick MGM would return to, of course, but it's also a trick that worked exactly once.
A lot of great stuff there, and we can always count on Anthony for perception and insight and a keen grasp of film history. I think he's absolutely right. It is interesting. We tend to think of Marx Brothers movies like, well, this would be terrible without the Marx Brothers, wouldn't it? But in a way, Anthony makes a good point here. The MGM films, chiefly A Night at the Opera, without the Marx Brothers, it would just be a movie.
Yeah, I like that a lot because I completely agree with what he said, but I hadn't really thought that before, that it actually is kind of Paramountish. It's just not Marx Paramountish. But it does have that kind of Lubitsch feel to it. And in fact, as we know, of course, the opening was originally even more Lubitsch with a song number where the lyric has kind of passed on from one passing character to another. So it would have been even more so. There is an element of kind of Paramount emulation to it. And I also agree, and I think I have said this before, that it is about them kind of consciously taking on the world of MGM, hence the Roaring Heads, which unfortunately got relegated to the, well, I'd say unfortunately, maybe correctly, got relegated to the trailer, but were originally intended for the top of the film. And the same thing, I think, with the title. Occasionally you hear people saying, it's the beginning of the end, and you can tell by the title, A Night at the Opera, it's this boring title. It's a kind of dull descriptive title as opposed to Horse Feathers or Duck Soup or whatever. But again, I think the point of that title is the juxtaposition. It's the Marx Brothers in A Night at the Opera, and it's setting up a confrontation. It's kind of like a bull in a china shop type of title. So yes, I think here at least they're not being consumed by MGM. They're being let loose there.
Now let's hear from the always reliable, always culinarily inclined Emily Malik.
A Night at the Opera is a great helping of spaghetti with meatballs, a giant loaf of bread, a huge cheese wedge, a bottle of Chianti, and a glass of bicarbonate of soda. In other words, it's most of the food that Chico, Harpo, and Ricardo eat while hanging out with the immigrants on the ship. I've loved A Night at the Opera ever since I was a kid. Growing up in the 2000s, there were a lot of cartoons that had opera-based episodes like Dexter's Laboratory and Hey Arnold. I watched A Night at the Opera around that same time, and I immediately enjoyed it. I loved the jokes, the gags, and the music. When I got older, I started noticing the craft that went into making the film. I also noticed how well developed Ricardo and Rosa are as characters. They feel like people I would have met in real life, which makes their romance all the more believable. I also feel more for Rosa on each watch because of how she resists Laspari's advances, especially in the wake of the Me Too movement. Like with Duck Soup, A Night at the Opera should have gotten multiple Oscar nominations. I would have given it 7, including Best Sound Recording, Best Song, Best Cinematography, Best Editing, Best Screenplay, Best Director for Sam Wood, and Best Picture. The way the sound was recorded makes it feel like the singing and instrumentals were done live. While Alone is kind of a sappy love song, I adore the way Harpo plays it on the harp, especially when he whistles part of it. That's the reason why I gave it the nomination. The cinematography is incredibly dynamic, particularly when Harpo is swinging on the ropes during the climax. I was a theater kid growing up, and there were plenty of times I wanted to do what he did when I was backstage. The editing is perfect for a comedy. The pacing is great, and it knows when to cut to something to enhance the joke or gag. This is especially true during the contract scene. The screenplay is fantastic and incredibly cohesive. Not only does it have great jokes and gags, but it also contains a strong and engaging plot. It balances out the plot in comedy, the drama, and humor in ways that are rarely this well done. In addition, I love how it weaves the story of the opera Il Trovatore into it, with the two plots involving two men fighting over the same woman, and when one of them realizes that she's interested in the other, he vows for revenge. Sam Wood balances the drama and humor with his direction and emphasizes supporting actors and their reactions whilst remaining focused on the brothers. All of these elements, along with the performances, make A Night at the Opera worthy of a Best Picture nomination. While I'm sad that it didn't get any in real life, I'm glad that the Ravelli Awards exist. While it might not be the most chaotic Marx Brothers movie, I always have a good time watching A Night at the Opera and feel full by the end. If I were to introduce someone to the Marx Brothers, I would make it a double feature with playing this while we eat dinner and Monkey Business during dessert. A Night at the Opera is a great dinner movie.
Yes, it certainly gets the Ravelli for best use of an animated butterfly.
Yes, indeed. I don't know that I've ever heard anyone else, until Emily's comments here, draw connections between the plot lines of A Night at the Opera and Il Trovatore. Is that... I think you are more familiar with Il Trovatore than I am, Matthew. I want to ask what you make of that connection. Are these elements just such standard plot elements that the connection isn't that significant, or is this an interesting way to look at the story?
It is an interesting way to look at it, certainly. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it is a much used plot, but on the other hand, from the kind of popular canon of operas, they could have easily picked any one of a dozen more that doesn't have that in it. I mean, I think it must be coincidental to the extent that the ideas for the film were being developed, I suspect, long before the choice of opera was decided upon. However, it's entirely possible that somebody being presented with that set of plot elements and kind of said, and we need to have a popular opera in there as well, would then have twigged and said, hey, how about Il Trovatore? So yeah, it's entirely possible, and it hadn't struck me before. I also think it's a very good point about Ricardo and Rosa being good characters in their own right, which they are.
Yeah, I like the point about Rosa resisting Laspari as well. I noticed that watching it last night to prepare for this, how great Kitty Carlisle is in the moment when Laspari has his, he might let me select my leading lady, putting that move on her. The way she doesn't break eye contact. She's looking him fast in the eye, and she just draws backward. She just backs up without breaking eye contact. It's really great. Well, let's now hear from our old friend Scott Ratner. I wonder what Scott will say about Gilbert and Sullivan this time.
Well, damn. I can't go on about Gilbert and Sullivan anymore. That boat sailed with duck soup. I can still invoke satire, but mostly in the negative because, as our podcast hosts have rightly noted, A Night at the Opera, despite a seemingly ideal setting for skewering cultural pomposity, does almost none of that. Sure, Gottlieb is pompous and pretentious, and Laspari pompous and an asshole, but these are individual villains, not stand-ins for society at large, or even for the operatic world itself. After all, the opera-goers in this film embrace Ricardo singing the moment they hear it. Now, looking at Thalberg's filmography as a whole, I'm still unconvinced that he was any kind of artistic genius, but he was unquestionably a commercial one. He clearly understood what audiences at the time wanted. And while his prestige pictures don't hold up as well as many other films of the 1930s, in my opinion, they undoubtedly paid off handsomely for MGM. His careful handling of the Marx Brothers pays dividends here as well. And yet I do believe the seeds of their decline are clearly planted in this picture, and long before Groucho was kicked down the stairs. As I've argued before, the problem with the MGM films isn't the romantic subplots, the musical interludes, or even the brothers' concern for the young lovers. After all, the Marxes of the Coconuts and Animal Crackers were offhandedly and casually, but still clearly on the side of the boy and girl, and just as clearly against the Harvey Yateses of the world. No, what's missing here instead is their magical invincibility, their freedom from ordinary human motivation. The stowaways in A Night at the Opera may be inept at hiding, and two hard-boiled eggs, but they don't send insulting notes to the captain. Otis B. Driftwood is after Mrs. Claypool's money, not subversion for its own sake. Harpo is no longer supernaturally gifted. Margaret Dumont, wary from the outset, no longer inhabits that self-healing bubble of delusion, and even the opera's glorious destruction serves a worthy end. elevating Ricardo to his deserved spotlight. Metro may invoke art for art's sake, but Marxian chaos here is no longer chaos for its own sake. The grand mystery of their motivation is here replaced by nothing more than the comparatively modest riddle of a manicurist's identity. And yet, it's admittedly all beautifully executed. And Thalberg was wise enough to know that for all the money to be spent on this film, there was still immense value in two men standing in one place and tearing up pieces of paper. I'll also admit that there's little even in horse feathers or animal crackers that makes me laugh harder than Boogie Boogie Boogie. So, they're now at the Rolls-Royce of studios, with a genuine hit on their hands, while they themselves are in the hands of Hollywood's great wunderkind. What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, I think I basically agree with that. I mean, I think Groucho is always after her money, but that's part of their, pursuit of appetite, isn't it? They're always they're out for what they can get, be it money or food or positions of responsibility or whatever. But basically, I think he's on the money there.
Yeah, I agree. I particularly like the point about how the villains in A Night at the Opera are individual villains rather than stand-ins for society or larger evils. That's a great point. And I also agree about the changes made in their characterizations at MGM. I think that's the one area where Anthony Strand in his comment goes a little farther than I would in sort of granting that the Marx Brothers are not as reined in at MGM as some have suggested. I think they pretty much are, and Scott nicely itemizes that in his comments. Scott, he just my vision of Scott Ratner is that he's somebody who just wakes up in the morning, stretches a little bit, and then delivers these perfect, spontaneous, witty spoken essays on classic showbiz topics. I'm sure that's not true. I'm sure much more effort goes into it, and that Scott is probably reading from a prepared text, but he's just so fluid, and he always has points that nobody else has.
I'm now picturing him waking up and stretching.
I do get the sense that he stretches in the morning. Now, let's hear some comments from Mr. Peter Freeman.
I have some specific questions and thoughts about A Night at the Opera. First of all, when they did the road tour, did they work on the dramatic pauses as well as the comedic ones? When Harpo gets kicked out of Laspari's room, Kitty Carlisle waits a good 5 seconds before she says anything to him. It's almost as if the filmmakers knew that they would be gasping in the audience. When Groucho is approaching the theater in the horse buggy, I feel like he should be in the sidecar with Harpo driving the motorcycle. When Kitty and Alan are singing alone at the dock, how can they hear each other? She's all the way up on the boat, and he's way down on the dock. And speaking of the boat, how did Groucho know it was Kitty in room 58 when he heard crying and just walked in? Isn't that just a little creepy? And when the three stowaways are in Groucho's room alone, why are they in the trunk? When Chico is about to give his speech at the dock as one of the aviators, wouldn't everyone listening to WHN have heard him talking to Groucho and realize he was a fake? And when they're in the apartment after that and Groucho asks Chico to read the newspaper about the aviator story, what did he expect? He knew from the contract scene that Chico can't read. The last scene of the film, when Groucho gets his job back, he says he'd like to get a hold of that elevator operator. I think this line was at another level. I'm used to the Marx's humor being about the present or planning for the future, and this is the first example I can think of where a joke reflects on an event that happened in the past. As a musician, there were a couple of things in this film that really stood out. Number one, conductors do not tap the podium before they start conducting. They just raise their arms, get everybody's eye contact with them, and then they start. And my personal favorite was when Groucho was walking around backstage in New York, you can see musicians in the background playing cards. The producers obviously knew something. I can tell you that at the Metropolitan Opera today, there is a poker game that happens with the low brass players. It's very difficult to get into, and the history of the poker game dates back to at least the 1920s. Finally, I can't help but feel a little sad as I watch this film. I know what used to be, and I also know what's coming. Now, don't get me wrong, A Night at the Opera is one of the greats. And while it may be better than some of their future work, there is one later film that I must admit I enjoy more.
I'm a big Story of Mankind fan too.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of interesting pieces to that comment, including, I would say, ample evidence to suggest that this story never really happened. But the idea of a joke being about something that happened in the past is very interesting. I can think of other examples. I mean, one that pops into my head right away is, I think it's in Monkey Business, when Groucho explains his mustache by saying the barber shop wasn't open this morning. I mean, that's similar, right? Also, things like, I mean, the entire Africa monologue in Animal Crackers is in the past tense, you know. But nevertheless, there is truth in the idea that is a little different. There's something about giving these characters any kind of backstory that always surprises us a little bit. Every now and then, a Groucho character will refer to a wife who we never meet or hear of, and doesn't really make sense that he could be married. And I think anytime these movies suggest a life for the characters that exists outside the actual frames of the film, that always feels like a rock has been lifted and we don't know what's living underneath it.
In terms of the road showing, I've always assumed that they only road showed the comedy and maybe the songs. I don't know. I mean, they took the straight, or people representing the straight leads along with them, didn't they? But I assumed that was just because they occasionally get involved in the comedy scenes. I don't know if they bothered to test the drama. I would be surprised, but I don't know.
I would be surprised too, but I suspect even if they didn't, the pacing that was suggested by the road testing affected the whole film. I mean, even pockets of comedy that probably weren't done on the road. You know, of course, they still have to have this same basic pace and rhythm and feeling as the rest of the film.
A real can of worms has been opened, though, by this tapping the podium observation, which occurs in countless films, and it had never occurred to me. I mean, I might have even done the Mandela effect thing and said that I thought I'd actually seen that happen myself. I'm now questioning it. It's obviously one of those things like Bob's hang up about people eating Chinese food out of cartons with chopsticks in films. The conductor tapping the podium. What an interesting observation. Nice poker game story too.
Yeah, it's like to get the ink to the bottom of the baton so you can...
It sort of implies that nobody's paying attention and he has to get the musicians to look at him.
Yeah, I mean, if I'd been asked, I might have assumed it was to quiet the audience, but I guess no audience needs to be quieted once the guy stood there, do they?
I go by Bugs Bunny's use of it in What's Opera, Doc? Is that what it, or what?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the gold standard there that we...
It is kind of interesting. I mean, Emily touched on that in her comments, the use of opera in cartoons and comedy and how very prevalent that used to be. I suppose an outgrowth of the fact that everyone used to know the big opera hits, and it's been in the public domain for a very long time. Well, we're in the rhyming commenters part of the show. We just heard from Peter Freeman, and we will now hear from Dan Lehman.
Hi, guys. A couple of thoughts from a recent reviewing of A Night at the Opera. First one's about the musical numbers. With the exception of Everyone Says I Love You and Horse Feathers, the Alone number is unusually well integrated into the film. First, it's not really much of a pause in the action. Instead, it's both the foreground and the backdrop for the embarkation of the ocean liner. The whole number is only about 4 minutes long, and after each lover gets a chorus, when we then have the obligatory repeat, very common in those days, so the audience would remember the song and want to buy the record of the sheet music, we have not one but 3 cutaways to action in comedy during the song. Rosa making sure Gottlieb hears Ricky sing, Chico and Harpo coming aboard with Harpo kissing everybody in sight, and Groucho making sure he doesn't have time to go back and pay his hotel bill. Secondly, it's actually material to the plot. Unlike When My Dreams Come True, or Why Am I So Romantic, or Gulp, Two Blind Loves, Alone expresses Rosa and Ricardo's more nuanced emotions of love and longing as they are experiencing them in the moment of the plot. It makes sense that they express themselves in song because they are singers. Don't ask where the orchestra is. I think this was pretty remarkable for its time, with Oklahoma, purportedly the landmark in integrating song's character and plot, being 8 years in the future. And thirdly, comes right after the contract scene, so maybe we're ready for a short break before the next funny sequence. Even Cosi Cosa is only about 3 minutes long, including all of the dancing, and other than giving Alan Jones another opportunity to exercise his fine tenor voice, leads nicely into the piano and harp solos. The comparison to A Day at the Races is startling. As Matthew and others have pointed out, the Blue Venetian Waters and ballet sequence could be a short film of its own and serves no real purpose, and the whole Megillah goes on for nearly 7 minutes virtually uninterrupted. Then we have the Tomorrow is Another Day, Who Dat Man, All God's Chillin' medley, which goes on for 10 minutes, smack in the middle of Act 3. Do you think this was due to Thalberg's absence during post-production, or a lack of Kaufman and Riskin quality writers, or was this meant to be a feature, not a bug? If A Night at the Opera went over well, why not try watering the comedy down even more? Secondly, about the stateroom scene. During your deep dive episode, one of you pointed out that if Groucho can't have a normal-sized stateroom, he decides to have some fun with how tiny it is. This reminded me of an old Jewish folk tale where the distraught farmer goes to the rabbi for advice. His house is only 2 rooms, he has 6 children, and the crowding and the noise are driving him nuts. The rabbi tells him to bring his chickens into the house and come back in a week. So the man comes back and tells the rabbi his advice was terrible. Things are even worse now. The rabbi then tells him to bring his goats into the house, and then the cows, and then the horse. This goes on for weeks, and each time things just get worse. Finally, the rabbi tells the man to get all the animals out of the house, at which point, of course, the house seems quiet and spacious. Do you think this might have been somewhere in the back of the minds of the Jewish writers, producer, or the Marxists themselves when the idea of the stateroom scene came about?
Good stuff from another commenter who knows his classic movie musicals. I would say, as far as the latter point, there's probably no way to know if that specific folk tale or old joke was on anyone's mind, but it certainly operates on the same principle, and it's one of those examples where you do find very classic strains of humor and particularly often Jewish humor running through the Marx mentality in the films. I also think it's a great point about Alone and the way it functions in that scene. It is true. It's probably a bit much to say that it anticipates Rodgers and Hammerstein, but nevertheless, the movie does not stop for that number. That number takes place while the story progresses, and yeah, it could be said to express what the characters are feeling. It's one of those musical numbers that is kind of on the it's right on the cusp between being a diegetic song or a source song where the characters are actually singing a song in the scene, and being a musical number that is narrative. Certainly the music is unexplained, there's no accompanist present, as there kind of is in that blistering attack on consent, Cosi Cosa.
I really like the comparison with the Water Carnival and the suggestion that maybe Thalberg might have mixed things up a bit had he had final say on that film. Again, not something that had struck me, but it is interesting because obviously what we see in Alone with those cutaways to the Marxes is a structural choice. It's not in the script that's in the MGM library of film scripts that's got the transcript of the film and the original script, and the original script doesn't have the song cut up like that. So it is a structural choice. It's obviously not, well, it's not obviously not, but it's presumably not the director's structural choice because it's the same director on both films. So maybe yes, maybe Thalberg might have looked at that Water Carnival and said, "Hey, this is great stuff. This is money well spent. Love it." But it's pretty long, and maybe we could just keep the film a bit zippier by slotting some cutaways into it. Hadn't occurred to me before. People have often said, do you think Thalberg would have greatly improved A Day at the Races? And my answer is always no. I think he would have made it shorter, but not better. And this is the first time I've thought, actually, he might have just perked that up a bit. I think maybe he might.
Yeah, I guess it's possible. I mean, one of the problems with that overall theory is that if we feel that the biggest problem with A Day at the Races is the script, Thalberg was around for that. I mean, that was the part that he worked tirelessly on and approved. So, we can't let him off the hook for much of the movie.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But I mean, the same applies to to the Night of the Opera script. That's not in the script. That's been
Yeah.
decided on afterwards.
Yeah, but I would think on paper, A Night at the Opera must have felt like a confident Marx Brothers vehicle. I mean, before it was shot,
Oh yeah.
In a way, it's hard to imagine they really thought they had lightning in a bottle again when they were preparing Day at the Races.
Yeah, opera is something that actually could have come up at Paramount in a different form.
That's interesting. Yeah, I wonder what that would have been like.
Hey, let me interrupt here. I don't want to get dragged through the mud on the internet. I did a little checking. The film with Bugs Bunny and the Baton was not What's Opera Doc. He did it in a few other films, Baton Bunny and a few others, but it was not in What's Opera Doc. So please leave me alone, okay?
Go easy on Bob, please, folks. He's a human being. We all make mistakes. Now we're going to hear from another friend of the show and past guest, multiple times guest, he said awkwardly. Please welcome comments from Cinco Paul.
Hi, my name is Cinco Paul. I am a screenwriter, and I have some thoughts on the stateroom scene, which, of course, is a masterpiece. It's brilliant. I love it. But I think there were some changes made from the original script that actually made the scene worse. My first point is the setup. In the script, it was much more clear that Mrs. Claypool was concerned about other people seeing her go to Driftwood's room. She says, "Consider my reputation," and Groucho says, "I give you my word, there will be nobody there but me." And I get that maybe they thought that would be hitting it too hard, but I think it makes it much funnier to highlight her worry. My second point is I think a couple of great jokes got cut. Currently, Groucho says, "Do you have 2 5s to the steward?" He says, "Yes." And Groucho says something like, "Well, then you won't need the 10 cents I was going to give you." But originally in the script, he said, "Do you have 2 5s?" The steward said, "Yes." And then Groucho said, "Come back later. I've got a tenner in my trunk," which is a great pun. And I'm sorry that wasn't included. And then there was another joke where Groucho said of Harpo, "Get those pajamas off of him. I've got other plans for those pajamas," which I think may have been removed as a nod to the censors, although there's a lot of suggestive stuff in there, make sure there are 2 pillows on the bed, etc. But sometimes I think you have to make concessions just to reduce the bulk, the amount of suggestive jokes. But I miss that one because I think that's much better. Right now in there's a very mundane exchange to end that little bit of the scene. Much better to end it with a joke. Speaking of endings, my third point is in the original script, when everyone fell out of the stateroom, Groucho had the young girl on top of him, and he said, "Now, Mrs. Claypool, I can explain everything." And sure, maybe not the greatest line, but it is a button, and the scene needs a button. I feel like everyone falling out isn't enough. It feels a little weird and weak and worse not to end with a line from Groucho. So those are my thoughts. I would love to hear what Matthew, Noah, and perhaps Bob think about that.
Yeah, I think it's an editing choice, I think, isn't it, to end to fade with them all falling out. I think that I get the impression there was more there, probably that line, and for whatever reason it was then decided to fade on them coming out.
It fades very quickly and abruptly.
Yeah. Very good point as well, though, about censorship. People often tend to think of censorship as being, utterly, draconian and an unyielding process, when in fact, in practice, it was very often give and take. So people often say, how did that line get passed? And the answer is probably because they gave up 2 others in exchange.
Yeah, that's a great point. All of these points that Cinco makes are great. I do, it hadn't occurred to me before, but I do now lament the deletion of some of that material from the script. It would be very interesting if the scene ended with a Groucho wisecrack, and that one sounds pretty serviceable to me, especially if you think of it in his voice. Yeah, I've always felt a little dissatisfied with the stateroom scene, but never for any reason that was worth articulating or that I could quite put my finger on. So I always assumed, well, probably just because that's such a classic scene. It's so well known. People who don't really know the Marx Brothers that well think in some cases that is that's definitive of them, and it really isn't. So all those little carps. But I didn't think it was much more than that. But maybe the scene is unsatisfying, or like a lot of the later Marx Brothers stuff, satisfying a couple of times. But when you're on your 500th viewing and the contract routine is still making you laugh, perhaps the stateroom scene isn't. It's also notable as silent comedy, right? It's one of the very rare Marx Brothers sequences that really doesn't need any dialogue as it is. Groucho's commentary in it is fine, but it's not really necessary. We wouldn't need lines to show that he was encouraging the room to get fuller and fuller. And the crashing out of the room when Margaret Dumont opens the door at the end, it's a very kinetic moment. It feels like the camera's a little sped up. It has a silent comedy energy to it.
And I think what dialogue humor there is in there could easily be conveyed in intertitles.
Yeah.
I've always wondered whether that sped up action at the end was something they always meant to do, or if they just decided to do it in post-production when they realized that it needed some sort of push.
Yeah. I mean, there is also something appealing about how brief that moment is, and the way it fades to black so quickly, and it gives you a little moment in that darkness before it asks you to grapple with what comes next. I mean, there is also something nice about that. It's a very ambitious comic idea. It's convincingly realized, and you just get a glimpse of it. You don't have a chance to get tired of it. Let us cease wondering what John J. McKinney has to say about A Night at the Opera and just do the sensible thing and listen to the man.
A Night at the Opera, or The Marx Brothers Play the Hits, or Thalberg Plays the Marx Brothers. This is the first time I've watched the film in decades because I spend all of my time reading about the Marx Brothers or listening about the Marx Brothers or contributing to podcasts about the Marx Brothers. So let's start with the opening credits. There, the O in opera has an unnecessary dot right in the middle of it. How did the Hayes office miss it? And now my first question mark for you gentlemen. Did they give Maggie an actual punchline here? Groucho insults Mrs. Claypole, then says, "How's that for lovemaking?" And Maggie says, "I think that the Europeans do it better." I laughed out loud, one of the few times I did in this movie. It helps that the European Gottlieb is standing right there. Now, I noticed that when Chico enters, he does a couple foreshadowings. The first is, he says that he was with the circus before the opera. That is foreshadowing. Then later, while Kitty is singing, he says, and I quote, "You bet my life." What did Chico know, and when did he know it? And then Groucho says to Chico, "You haven't got a baboon in your pocket, but I have no idea why." Then comes the dock scene, which I spent searching fruitlessly for Frenchie, who happened to die before the movie was filmed. My next question as we go to the stateroom scene. We have about 15 actors in that stateroom. Are you telling me we know the names of every one of those actors except the manicurist? I'll close with a few unsolicited opinions. Number one, Alan Jones just oozes charisma in this movie. He blows away absolutely any of the other love interests in any Marx Brothers movie. Number two, I learned that Alan Jones's signature song was The Donkey Serenade from the film The Firefly. And I watched that film. It is the worst Western ever. Yeah, I did see Go West. Number three, the breakfast scene in this movie is better than the breakfast scene in Room Service. Number four, the switching rooms and playing hide-and-go-seek in this movie is much worse than the one they did in Coconuts. And number five, in the end, I give Thalberg his due. This is not the best Marx Brothers movie, but it is the best movie the Marx Brothers were ever in. If she figures that one out, she's good.
Well, I knew Alan Jones was oozing something, but it's good to know it's true.
Well, let me get the manicurist thing out of the way here really quick.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
My whole fascination with it first came about, there was some Marx Brothers message board long time ago where someone asked the question, like, who are all the people in the stateroom scene? And they were able to pretty much decipher all of them except for the manicurist and the girl who comes in and asks for Aunt Minnie. And within a few weeks or a couple months, everybody discovered it was Marion Bell, the girl who came for Aunt Minnie, and the discussion just sort of tailed off. But the manicurist question just remained and still does to this day.
It'd be fun to make a key like where we, number the faces in a still and then list all the names. We should do that the next time we do a big push on on Operation Manicurist or something similar. I think a lot of John's points are right on the money. And although I'm always interested in what John has to say, I do have to take issue with one thing he says, which is about the dot in the middle of the O in the opening credits. I know it seems, as John puts it rather harshly, unnecessary. I agree. It does seem unnecessary, but if you've ever tried to remove that dot, you may learn, as I once did, that it's actually holding up the entire movie. And if you don't leave it in place, you're not going to get anywhere.
They didn't have the CGI effects back then to get it out.
To block it out, exactly. Yeah. So don't touch that dot.
Right.
I agree about the Margaret Dumont line. I think the Europeans do it better. That is a great, funny line that they gave her. And you're right. Yeah, they kind of gave her a joke there. And it's a great moment.
And it does point to the interesting fact, doesn't it, that in this film, she is not senselessly in his thrall.
Yes.
Right from the start, long before she has him fired, she's got his number. She knows what he's about. And next time in Day at the Races, she's smitten again. But for this one film, she's savvy.
That's so true. And it doesn't affect their dynamic in a negative way. It's still just as amusing.
She's actually on the side of him being fired.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, it's more like her character in Coconuts, who also was never really taken in by him. But here, she's much more likable. She's also got, it's not quite a joke in the same way, but, when Groucho says, you see the man eating the spaghetti, and she just says, no, and Groucho says, wow, you see the spaghetti, don't you? So that's the punchline. But I don't know, her saying no to that question is a little cheeky in a way that I don't know if we would have gotten from her in other appearances.
And the baboon joke, of course, is baboons have very long arms. So a baboon would be able to, if the baboon had the same eyesight competence as Groucho, it would be able to more easily read the letter because its arms are longer. But the joke obviously is Groucho implying that having a baboon would somehow be helpful to him.
Yeah, I think we talked about this in our original opera deep dive. I've never loved that joke. I mean, I understand the long arms and nearsightedness premise, but it just seems like having a baboon in your pocket wouldn't solve that problem anyway. So
that's actually a line I've used in real life several times. And the same reaction as you probably gave. No.
I will say, though, that having just learned in the last minute that in England they emphasize the first syllable of that animal's name.
Yes.
That is enchanting to me, and I would like to have a long talk about baboons.
Do you say bassoon or bassoon?
Bassoon.
Bassoon, yeah. Bassoon, baboon.
Oh, you said it too? Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Balloon is another, like...
Balloon,
kind of, but you don't say balloon. Well, we could go down this avenue forever, but I guess we must move on. Anything else on the comments of Mr. McKinney?
Nope.
There was a lot of good stuff there. I like that last part about not the best Marx Brothers film, but the best film the Marx Brothers were in.
Yeah,
that's a great way to put it.
Probably right. Yeah, exactly. Also, I do like the idea that, it's fun to play with the idea that all the Marx Brothers films are part of a sort of integrated cinematic universe, although we know they clearly aren't. But things like Captain Spaulding being tattooed on J. Cheever Loophole's former lover, is interesting. And yeah, here Chico does kind of open the door to the possibility that At the Circus chronologically precedes A Night at the Opera. And we might wonder why these guys got so much funnier after after time passed. Jesse Levy is our next commenter.
I did something with The Night at the Opera that I haven't done with the other films. I watched it with the commentary track on. The commentary track was done by Leonard Maltin, and he describes the Milan opening in a lot of really good detail. He also made a couple of errors. He said Margaret Dumont didn't get the jokes, which we now know is wrong. He also makes a great point about Alan Jones and Kitty Carlisle. We like them because they work well together, they sing well together, and the Marx Brothers like them, and they like the Marx Brothers. Ricardo and Chico's character, they have a connection from the past. And Groucho has some very nice sympathetic moments with Kitty Carlisle's character. So the brothers have a real relationship with the two of them. And then going back to Leonard's commentary, we find out from him that the song Alone was not written for this movie. I didn't know that. And Leonard also says that Thalberg fought for the stateroom scene to stay when the writers wanted to drop it because it didn't work during the road tryouts. Because how can you recreate a crowded room on stage? That didn't really play well. That's it. Thanks, fellas. Great work as usual.
Leonard Maltin also says that Frenchie is on board the ship in that commentary as well.
Yeah, it's funny in those commentaries how sometimes even very knowledgeable, super articulate film experts, when they're speaking off the cuff, and when for some reason they occasionally might have other things on their minds besides the Marx Brothers, can make those kinds of errors.
Yeah, but I think Matthew's just pissed off because Maltin didn't review his book.
Oh, I see.
Exposed.
That bastard. Is there anyone else who never reviewed your book? Maybe we can preemptively insult them.
Not that are still alive, no.
Now that the Marx Brothers films are marching into the public domain at a rate of about one a year, the opportunity for others to do commentaries on them is wide open, isn't it, fellas?
Sure is.
Let's put a pin in that. And listen to the comments of the very charming father-daughter act we've heard from in the past. Here are Howard and Juliet Megdal.
Juliet, for A Night at the Opera, what did you think on the second time watching it?
I thought it was really great. I really liked the stateroom scene when they were all crowding into the room. I thought that was very funny. And then I also liked the scene on the boat where Harpo was getting the plate of his pasta and his expressions were very good.
Juliet and I think, both liked the Paramounts most because it's just pure, uncut Marx Brothers, right? Isn't that... Like, you don't love the other stories, right?
Yeah.
You always want the Marx Brothers on screen. And I think, by the way, that's why A Night at the Opera, to me, works better than even A Day at the Races and so many of the movies that came after. Even when they're establishing other storyline, they're still giving us a whole lot of the Marx Brothers. The Marx Brothers are part of all of those things that are going on.
Yeah.
What did you think of the Take Me Out to the Ball Game portion of the opera?
That was so funny when they made the violin a baseball bat.
Yeah. And again, that's the other part of this is this movie, I think, has the best ending of any of the films, and it builds. And we get, I mean, that last 20 minutes, the entire scene at the opera just gets better and better and better and resolves the main story, but never loses the Marx Brothers while they're doing it. And I wish there had been that sort of tie-in together in a lot of the films that came after.
Good stuff. Always nice to hear from Howard and Juliet. What do you think of the proposition that A Night at the Opera might have one of the stronger endings of the films?
Yeah, it's certainly one of the stronger, climaxes. The actual ending is good too, but yeah, certainly the way it builds to that frenzy is terrific, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is a great ending. It's an ending that has more responsibility on it than any preceding Marx Brothers film, possibly any following Marx Brothers film. But this is the first time, I think, that any of these films kind of would feel a little unsatisfying if the ending didn't resolve the story. We've never had that with any of the other films. All we needed in the past was a great comic button that felt like it fulfilled the momentum that's been building up throughout the whole film. And as we know, usually they don't. I mean, Duck Soup is a rare example of a strong ending where you feel like you go out with a bang that's commensurate with the rest of the movie. This is a different kind of thing. It's not a gag ending. It is a great musical ending. I mean, A Night at the Opera and A Day at the Races both end with big blast, the big last note of the song right to the camera as the fade out happens. Coconuts does that too, come to think of it, although it's a somewhat more downbeat in Coconuts. And I guess one of the reasons we do keep returning to Duck Soup as the ultimate ending is because it's both. It's a big musical ending and a big gag ending.
My question with the end of the film is, we never find out what happened with the aviators. What became of those guys?
Oh, good point.
Did they get dragged off as illegal immigrants? Did ICE take them away?
Well, this is a story that could be developed.
We could, yes, they could have had a kind of at the circus type ending with the orchestra, where the last
floating
the
out.
last shot is the aviators being taken away. Yeah. I also was quite taken with Juliet's observation about Harpo's face when he gets the pasta.
Mm-hmm.
Without in any way wanting to be patronizing, because she's obviously a very smart person, but that strikes me as a classic child's observation and a reminder of Harpo's appeal to children. I don't think any adult would home in on that as one of their favorite moments, but she absolutely did, and it's a reminder of Harpo's very real rapport with children when they watch the films.
Yeah, and the whole point of that scene is that they come out on deck to get some food because they're hungry, so it's sort of like the payoff.
They've been trying to eat since the beginning of the stateroom scene.
Yeah, and then the way he wipes up the last, they fade to the finishing the meal and the wiping the bread on the plate and all that stuff. It's just good filmmaking.
It is one of the most vicariously satisfying eating and drinking scenes in movies. In the way that you always feel like a drink when characters in films drink. Boy, do you feel like an Italian meal there.
Yeah, my only criticism here is when Alan Jones says, after a meal like that, I could sing my head off. I don't think that line was written by an experienced singer or performer because, boy, the last thing you want to do after a huge meal is sing your head off. And most people I know who have done any kind of singing or emoting in public want to do that on a fairly empty stomach.
Yeah, surprised he didn't belch.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or even just blasting your garlic breath to everyone on the deck. Like, that number smells like garlic to me.
Yeah, after a number like that, I could go to bed for 12 hours. It's probably more,
Yeah.
Guys, let's go back to the room and get back in the trunk.
All right. Here we have Jimmy and Jelena.
Two quick Night at the Opera thoughts. One, if Zeppo somehow had stayed, would something of the spirit of the Paramounts have survived the MGM process, the Thalberg process? Secondly, rewatching it this time, for some reason, Cozy Koza has been lodged in my brain. It's been about 2 weeks since I rewatched it, and virtually every morning, Cozy Koza is in my head. Pray for me. Thank you.
Thoughts and prayers.
Oh, there's a cure for that, but you're not going to like it.
If any of you know Jimmy Angelina, every time you see him, ask him how he is and see if he replies Kosi Kosa.
Yeah, I do think Jimmy's previous comment is an interesting one, and I think the answer is yes. If Zeppo were in A Night at the Opera, it would be more like a Paramount film. And that would be true if he was in the Alan Jones part, but it would also be true if Zeppo was just Groucho's assistant and had one or two brief scenes in the movie. Zeppo, by his very presence, makes the proceedings more Paramount-y, and I would say more Marxian, specifically because there isn't much of a reason for him to be there. I mean, Zeppo is, by his presence, illogical, and he flies in the face of narrative convention and everything else that we think of the Marx Brothers as being in opposition to. The only reason Zeppo is in any movies is because he is a Marx brother. There's no other reason, but that's the most important thing in the world, being a Marx brother. So I think the answer is yes, and it's one of the reasons I wish he hadn't left the act.
And I think the answer is no, for exactly the same reasons.
Well, finally, we have a conflict between the hosts.
Well, wait a minute. We discussed this before. I think we came to the conclusion that Zeppo would have been the conduit to Ricardo instead of Chico, right?
Yeah.
Which ties in actually with something somebody else says later. I think it's Glenn Davis. So I'll say bookmark that comment and I'll come back to it.
Actually, do you want to stick it in now? Because we were going to...
Hey.
Do you want to gently insert it now? Because...
Yeah.
Hey, here are some comments that are relevant to the comments we've just heard. And as usual, this is a very nicely produced set of comments from our friend Glenn Davis.
I have to admit that I still get a thrill every time I hear the opening of A Night at the Opera. It is, by any standard, a fantastic film comedy, and it's the best looking of all the Marx Brothers pictures. Whatever you might want to say about the Thalberg formula, it worked here. Now, if we were seeing it without the knowledge of where their careers would go after this, its flaws would be less concerning. Just a mole, nothing to worry about. But because we do know where things would go from here, we can't help but react to the first worrisome symptoms of the boys' decline at MGM. We're all too keenly aware of Laspari beating Harpo and Groucho being shoved down the stairs, but in the long run, it was Chico who suffered the most. Coming off the Paramounts, his first scene with Alan Jones is kind of jarring. He's so sentimental, so open, so encouraging, so, well, warm.
Hey, I know just the man for you. You do? Who is it? Me. But you wouldn't make any money at it. All right, I break even, just as long as I'm not losing nothing.
This is no Emmanuel Ravelli. And this sets in motion the inevitable decline to the gotta help it those kids Chico. Speaking of which, a more ominous moment is when, in the park bench scene, he spots Rosa and reacts by calling out her name and running to greet her as though she's some combination of his own sainted mother and the Queen of Sheba.
It's Rosa! Rosa! Well, at least I can get my bench back.
All this for someone else's girlfriend. But back to that first scene with Jones. It's amazing to consider that the decision was made that Chico, the guy who refused to do anything if it couldn't be classified as stealing and told the bridegroom to shut up at an engagement banquet, was handed the task of being the warm, friendly Marx brother. Now, Leonard Marx was known to have great personal charm. In fact, that charm helped parlay a bridge game with Irving Thalberg into a two-picture deal that landed them at MGM. But here's the thing. In that first scene with Jones, he carries the assignment off beautifully. Chico exudes charm and warmth and friendship and likability.
Anyhow, we're together again. You and me, just like old times, eh? Yeah, like old times. Hey, you bet my life.
My wonderful wife, like so many mates of Marx enthusiasts, tolerates my love of the brothers, but doesn't really share it. In the early years of our relationship, when I was still trying to lure her into the cult, I showed her opera. She was smitten by this scene, and specifically by Chico. She thought he was fantastic and commented on his warmth and charisma. Interesting to note, his ability to charm the ladies long outlived him. When this version of Chico faded after that scene, so did her enjoyment of the movie. It seems to me that Chico was handed an unlikely and thankless task and carried it off magnificently. I'd go so far as to suggest that this scene gives us the best conventional acting performance by any of the brothers in any of their films. Of course, about the last thing you want from a Marx Brothers conventional acting, but nonetheless, had he had the opportunity, or really the interest, you could easily see how he could have gone on to become a character actor in the Hollywood tradition, playing best friends and eccentric uncles. Chico totally does the job he was assigned and does it with considerable skill and talent infused with his own natural charm. Given where it would all eventually lead, the denatured Chico of the big store, it all started rather promisingly. Maybe he shouldn't have been so good.
Hey, you bet my life.
Thanks to the council elders, and keep up the great work.
I love those thoughts about Chico. Actually, that really got me thinking. I mean, we've often said that of the three at MGM, he's the one who comedically dies first and dies most comprehensively, and that it basically happens here, albeit in a blaze of glory with the aviator speech, which again we've said is literally the last time he's ever allowed to be funny on his own. But I really like this point about that he becomes the conduit between the Marx world and the straight world, and he gets nominated as the ingratiating one now. And it is absolutely by default. It's simply because Zeppo's not around anymore. It would have been Zeppo, but he's not there. It would have been Harpo. It would have been Harpo would have turned into Love Happy Harpo because he's sentimentalized at MGM. So he would be the natural choice there. But of course he doesn't speak, so he can't do it. Because the role of conduit, the role of ingratiating character, has to be a speaking role. So it is absolutely by default that it falls on Chico's shoulders. And again, I also agree with Glenn that although it's a kind of a comic tragedy what happens to Chico, and that what he does we don't want him to do. Yes, he does do it extremely well.
Yeah, it's a great points here. I love what Glenn has to say, and I love what you have just said about it, Matthew. I also think that in addition to the idea that in the MGM mode they needed a Marx Brother to be this avuncular, friendly, sort of happy-go-lucky character, it also helped deal with another problem. Not so much in A Night at the Opera, which had excellent writers, but every film following it, which is it deals with the problem of Chico being so hard to write for. I mean, to write comedy material for. And anyone who's ever tried their hand at writing a little Marx Brothers comedy finds pretty quickly you expect Groucho to be the mountain you have to climb, but actually it's a lot easier to write for Groucho than to write for Chico. To write good, funny Chico stuff is almost impossible. Very few people did it well, even during the prime Marx Brothers years. Nat Perrin was hired on the strength of his surprising ability to write for Chico. It was challenging. And so if Chico is now just has to be Mr. Nice Guy and that's all, you've killed two birds with one stone. And I also really love the companion point that all this being the case, Chico is still delightful in that scene. His acting is absolutely wonderful. And I think we've said this before sometimes when we talk about some of the later TV work and some of the might have beens in their later career. It's a shame we never got to see Chico try like any Walter Matthau type roles, because he probably would have been wonderful.
He should have been Martini in It's a Wonderful Life.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, imagine Chico as like one of the gangsters in Guys and Dolls. Not one of the leads, but one of the menagerie of Damon Runyon gangster types on the side. He would have been fantastic.
And these things can happen as well. I mean, you tend to think of things that haven't happened as therefore things that can't happen, but they could. Stuff like this happened all the time. The other day I was watching the John Wayne film, The Fighting Kentuckian, which has got a supporting role for Oliver Hardy, and he's terrific. He's great in it. Just somewhere along the line, it could have happened, and it would have been so interesting to see.
People are always surprised when comedians turn out to be very capable dramatic actors. But it's actually not that surprising. Comedians have to have all the same skills that actors have, and they have to be funny. It's more unusual when comedians can't act.
Yeah.
And now we will hear some comments about the film A Night at the Opera from the person, Mike Herman.
I feel like the main point of discussion is going to be Irving Thalberg, and I want to play a little bit of devil's advocate and champion him. He's been viewed in some really unflattering light recently. I don't know if you saw Babylon and Mank, but he's kind of made into like a mustache-twirling villain in them. And of course, he's almost the Satan of Marxism if we think about the whole common belief that he neutered the Marx Brothers. I like Thalberg not necessarily because of his work on this film, but I really love the early era of MGM. The size and spectacle of movies like Mutiny on the Bounty or Grand Hotel, they really still hold up. And of course, I love that he took risks and made a star out of someone like Lon Chaney with really macabre material with Todd Browning. And I know the idea of a movie producer has always been kind of ugly, but Irving Thalberg probably is the idealized version that should be aspired to. He sought to make big hit movies without skimping on the artistic merit. I think that's really the reason Groucho loved him. I would encourage the listeners to read Irving Thalberg, Boy Wonder to Producer Prince by Mark Vera, or Louis B. Mayer and Irving Thalberg, The Whole Equation by Kenneth Turan. They're both excellent. It's a great kind of American story, and he really is like the avatar for the creation of American film. And as far as Night at the Opera goes, I still think it's pretty funny. You can't hate a movie with so much Sig Ruman.
I'm all for Thalberg. I mean, when we talk about the Marx Brothers films and his formula for reinventing them, I think you have to split it into two separate things. One is adding lots of stuff, Young Lovers and Songs and Production Gloss and whatever, and the other is tampering with the Marx Brothers themselves. And I think the former is fine. I have no problem with that at all, provided that they are, that they are left to be who they are and to do what they do. And really, the really onerous or odorous rather examples of them not being allowed to do what they do come later, come after Thalberg, and more or less we can all pick on certain things in opera that are wrong for them, but by and large, you're getting what you want from them, just with a bunch of other stuff as well. And I'd be more than happy with 6 films like that. And otherwise, yeah, I think there is a tendency, possibly largely because of those 2 Marx Brothers films and the comparison with Paramount, to kind of undercut Thalberg's importance. He was obviously commercially a very smart man, but also, he did produce a lot of great films. I mean, Grand Hotel there was mentioned, but I mean, the silent era, The Big Parade, The Crowd, fantastic silent films. And also, I think when people criticize the kind of arid quality of MGM, the big prestige MGM films, tend to forget about MGM's pre-code films, which were every bit as dank and sleazy as anybody else's, and particularly ones that Thalberg was associated with. Red Dust, Red-Headed Woman, The Divorcee, Rasputin and the Empress, and of course Freaks were all Thalberg productions. Freaks was something that Thalberg absolutely went out to bat for, and really stood by against a lot of opposition. One of the few times that his instincts didn't pay off commercially, but creatively he was right behind Freaks.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I considered Mike's comments, I thought, have I even ever seen an Irving Thalberg film other than A Night at the Opera or A Day at the Races? I looked at the list of his filmography, and I discovered, as I'm sure almost anyone would, there's an awful lot of movies here, and I have seen a handful of these that I didn't realize he was associated with, or at least I didn't remember.
Because he doesn't take billing. That's
because he's never billed, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a very diverse list of movies, very eclectic in terms of the kinds of films and the kinds of collaborators. And I did notice that, there were a handful that I had seen, and they were all good movies that I liked. I mean, it was maybe 4 or 5, non-Marx Brothers movies on the list that I recognized. But they were all good ones. I also thought it was interesting to see how many had some connection to the Marx Brothers, including the 1928 silent Laugh Clown Laugh, which Groucho quotes in the poem from Animal Crackers, and also the film version of Strange Interlude was an Irving Thalberg production.
And The Trial of Mary Dugan with Sound.
Oh, my goodness. And The Trial of Mary Dugan with Sound. All right. Here we have some commentary on A Night at the Opera from the always reliable, incisive Pat McCahey.
Over the holidays, I watched A Night at the Opera and followed it up a few days later with The Coconuts. At the time, I posted to the council that I was struck by the difference in tone between the Paramount and the MGM. But I think what I mean is the change in the characters of the three brothers and how the world relates to them. This has been discussed before, including Matthew in the annotated Marx Brothers, which means I should shut up and let him talk. And yet here we are. As to the brothers' characters, in A Night at the Opera and the rest of the MGMs, Groucho is less in control. He's fired, kicked downstairs, knocked off a park bench, etc., and he seems to be reacting more to outside forces than to being a force of nature himself. This isn't so obvious in opera, where I think he can still dominate, but I think it gets more obvious as the MGMs go on. I don't think it makes him more sympathetic, or why a sympathetic Groucho is a better Groucho anyway, but I guess Thalberg thought so. Chico becomes more of a conduit to making sure that the young lovers have a happy ending, a far cry from the schemer of the Paramounts, and I'm not sure MGM Chico would have even made a play for Connie Bailey. Though I do think his natural magnetism makes him a decent fit as a helpful friend. And after Sanity Clause, does Chico have another good cinematic pun? Or any at all? Poor Harpo fares the worst. Too much of opera is a Harpo stand-in swinging around on ropes, getting hoisted around and getting doused with water, when he's not getting horsewhipped. Give me a Harpo crawling out from under a bed squirting water from his mouth, while he's trying to hide, just for the fun of it. And maybe that's it. Opera suddenly turns them from wonderfully illogical and celestial to annoyingly logical and terrestrial. A Night at the Opera is saved by very good material, but I'm afraid that during my last viewing, I just saw the beginning of the long slide towards Go West. And lest Bob think that I'm shirking my manicurist hunting duties by taking time to record this, I need to report that I'm currently going through about 1,500 names in the back of Call Bureau classification casting directories, under omissions, additions, and errors, that have no photographs, trying to find pictures of them all. At least when I'm done, I'll have the names of 1,500 women who aren't her. Like Shakespeare said to Nathan Hale, I always get my man, the curist.
Great stuff, as always, from Pat. Celestial to terrestrial. That is a very great, concise summary of what happens to the Marx Brothers over the course of the 1930s. Sanity Clause probably is Chico's last great pun, but sadly not his last pun. For example, nitrate in the big store. All right, everyone, you're going to want to turn the volume down slightly for some commentary from our pal, Eddie Deason.
Hi, this is Eddie Deason, and this is my opinion of A Night at the Opera, my views. Okay, A Night at the Opera for me is the analogy Marx Brothers movie. I have two analogies I've always thought of for it. Okay, the Marx Brothers in the early 5 films, particularly the last 3, where you got Monkey Business, Horse Feathers, and Duck Soup. They were kind of, if you take them as painters, let's make the analogy that they were painters. The Marx Brothers were Picasso. They had all this crazy stuff. They throw all this crazy, and no formula, just throws all these crazy elements in, wild and crazy stuff that didn't connect, just scene after scene that didn't connect, and all this surreal stuff. And they somehow made these great, beautiful films, like Picasso. Picasso had no formula. He'd throw all these colors. It's almost like he threw these blobs and all these paint colors came together, and they made a beautiful picture. That was the Marx Brothers in the first 5 films. They were Picasso. Then, when they made A Night at the Opera, something changed. They made a beautiful film. A Night at the Opera is indisputably a great comedy movie. It's a beautiful MGM film, but it's a formula film. It's kind of like Norman Rockwell. That's when the Marx Brothers became Norman Rockwell. Norman Rockwell's a great painter. You look at his paintings, they're beautiful work, but they became kind of like Norman Rockwell, and it became like a formulaic thing, and it got more and more and more like that, and they kind of went down and down and down and down. It never was quite the same. Night at the Opera was great. Day at the Race a little less great, and then it kind of went down the line. They never recaptured that great magic when they were Picasso, the first 5 films. My other analogy is the Marx Brothers, Elvis Presley, they were Elvis. The first 5 films of Marx Brothers, the 5 wild and crazy films, they were young Elvis before the army got him. They were Elvis, with the sideburns and the swing and the wiggling hips and singing all these great rock songs and rocking out. That was the Marx Brothers. They had this kind of visceral effect, and those films are so viscerally great, so viscerally funny. They're wonderful. Then when A Night at the Opera came, that's when Elvis got drafted into the army. They cut off his sideburns. He became more disciplined. He'd say, yes, sir, no, sir. And he was no longer the rebel. And that's the other analogy I see. The Marx Brothers are kind of like Elvis, and the films weren't doing that good. But interestingly, Night at the Opera was a hit, whereas Duck Soup was disappointing at the box office. Elvis's films were okay. And then after he became this straight guy and did this formula films, all the films did make money. So the Marx Brothers started making money. Day at the Race was a hit. Night at the Opera was a hit. Now, I don't know if the later ones were as much, but the Elvis analogy, I think, still holds. They became kind of like Elvis after the army, and they never recovered that greatness they had before that. That's my opinion, Night at the Opera. Thank you, and thank you for the Marx Brothers podcast.
Before you respond to this, I should point out that Eddie sent us his comments on a video, which looks like it was taken in a liquor store. So I can't vouch for how sober he was when he.
Well, in all fairness, I'm recording this in a marijuana dispensary.
So the moral is, let soldiers wear sideburns.
What do you make of these analogies, Matthew?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know anything about Elvis, obviously, but I kind of agree with his points about the artists, but I suspect I would probably reverse the artists.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had that feeling. Like I totally agree with what Eddie is saying about A Night at the Opera, and I always, I think Eddie is usually right on the money or very close to the money when he talks about the Marx Brothers and about comedy. But yeah, I'm not sure I agree with Eddie here about Picasso and Norman Rockwell. I mean, I don't think of Picasso as having no rhyme or reason and no formula, as Eddie says. I mean, I think actually, although Picasso's work, communicates tremendous freedom and feels very rule breaking, I think it might actually be just the opposite, rigorously applying its own logic. I mean, Cubism is like, just show every perspective at the same time, even though you can't in real life. I mean, it has a clear technique to it. And Norman Rockwell, too, I think, spent a career developing this style, but only in the later part of his career at Look magazine did he use that style to make significant points. I mean, his work was always beautiful to look at, and at the end, it acquired great depth, too. So there's that. Now, an interesting question might be, how could we make this analogy work for us? Like, are there painters whose work compares neatly with the Paramount versus the MGM Marx Brothers? I have a hard time answering that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem with Paramount in terms of finding these analogies is what exactly it is that you're going to zero in on. Because yes, you can talk about them in terms of freedom and idiosyncrasy, but it's controlled freedom and it's planned freedom. So what you're actually looking at is kind of perfection in those films. It's taking those elements and absolutely bringing them to a pitch of perfection. So somebody like, I mean, I'm not, to be honest, I'm not all that familiar with Norman Rockwell, but staying with American artists, I would say somebody like Edward Hopper, where you have these absolutely perfect little snapshots. I might be inclined to say somebody like Edward Hopper is more Paramount-y, and somebody like Picasso, I would say, is working to formula rather more than certain other more traditional artists that you could come up with.
Yes, I agree with that. I thought it would be a simple matter to just think about painters for a minute, and I'd say, that's the Paramount example from the world of painting. But it's tough. I mean, I every answer is insufficient. I thought of painters whose work communicates a lot of wit and humor. I mean, that's a school of art. I would think of the Alice Neal as that being that kind of painter, or some painters whose work seems very joyous and unconfined, like Romare Bearden. I think there's maybe a little bit of a Marx Brothers joyful spirit running all over an ocean liner. But I don't know. That doesn't really hold up. I don't actually think those painters do what the Marx Brothers did in the Paramount films. And oddly enough, although there's a temptation to think of Dada and Surrealism because of the affinity for the Marx Brothers that those artists tend to have, I don't think Salvador Dali was a particularly Marxian kind of artist, and I don't really think Duchamp was either. Maybe some of the rule breaking of like artists like Basquiat and Warhol, but it's kind of strange how Salvador Dali, although it feels like surrealism and illogic and craziness, it's so steeped in technique. I mean, he was a very conservative painter with regard to technique, and without the ability to render a very convincing tree branch, draping a melting clock over it doesn't matter. So in a way, Dali is a better analogy to the MGM years than to the Paramount years.
Yeah, I was with a friend at the, I think it was at the Tate Modern, which is, just a kind of a blizzard of modern and experimental stuff. And there were a couple of Dalis there. And the person I was with said, doesn't that look out of place there in its gold frame? And I thought, yeah, what a brilliant observation. That's pretty much the only piece of art that we've seen in this entire gallery that's sat on the wall in a gold frame. And I thought, yes, that's why Dali isn't the Marx Brothers. As of course he went on to prove when he tried to write.
Yes.
I mean, I think pop art is kind of has something in common with the Marx Brothers in terms of its spirit. Somebody like what's he called, the guy Klaus Oldenburg. There's a kind of a Marxian spirit behind it, but obviously you couldn't actually say, well, this actual piece is Marxian.
I just want to get back to the Elvis thing for a moment. I think that's a really good analogy. When you think about it, when Elvis first came out, he was very original and didn't fit the mold, and it was quite groundbreaking. But after the army, it was pretty much just trying to fit him into the mainstream commercial landscape.
Yeah, that seems like that really works. And I'm not very familiar with particularly Elvis's later career, but that seems to be a very common rock and roll story, starting out as a rule-breaking, anarchic force.
Yeah, basically what he was doing before the army was what he wanted, and what he did after the army was what Colonel Parker told him to do.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, I'm familiar with the hip-shaking early Elvis. Many rock and roll artists, they begin as rebels, offending the parents of their listeners. Mm-hmm. And then eventually they're recording an album of songbook standards, or Christmas songs or something.
Christmas album, yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of what happens to the Marx Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think it's also that they're kind of playing catch up with themselves. And to some extent, this is also unavoidable. Obviously, the MGM editions aren't particularly helpful. But they don't have to be fatal if the Marxists still have the goods themselves. And I think yes. I think not all of the blame can be placed on the studio and the writers, but also on them. I mean, we've said before that they're lazy in their later films, which they are. But even if they weren't, they've just lost what I think I've probably said this before. But what I've eventually decided to call the crackle, and the crackle is the little electric charge that you get when an act is absolutely not just at their best, but at at the kind of cutting edge and know it. And you particularly see this with TV comedians who are playing against a live audience. I don't really know the Americans well enough, but British listeners, why are the early Kenny Everett shows better than the later ones? Why are the earlier Russ Abbott shows, whatever you think of Russ Abbott, so much better than the later ones? It's not the material. It's a certain kind of energy that passes between the performer and either the actual audience that's there laughing or the presumed audience if they're on film. And it's like a little electric crackle that says, I know I'm totally hip and I've got this. And you can't fake it. When it's taken away, you can't pretend it's still there. So you sort of get artists fighting their own shadow almost, and I think that's what you see in those later films. And you see it with somebody like Fellini. Fellini, up to and including La Dolce Vita, is being left to his own devices, and he's being allowed to just be Fellini. And then suddenly with La Dolce Vita, everyone realizes he's Fellini, and so he's condemned to being Fellini, and suddenly it's an effort being Fellini, and he ends up imitating Fellini, and it just gets harder and harder, and people care less and less. I suppose the consensus view of Woody Allen would be somewhat analogous to that, although I personally do really like the later films, but again, something of that.
There's no clear dividing line in Woody's career anywhere except maybe right at Annie Hall.
Annie Hall, I think, I would say. Yeah.
But you wouldn't say he lost the crackle then.
Yeah. But I think we could all agree that the Marx Brothers' career would have gone in a totally different direction had they been drafted after Duck Soup.
Yeah, that's a good point.
and have their sideburns cut off, yeah.
Well, now let's hear some crackling commentary from Mr. Roy Maltby.
Nowadays, computer fonts can have every letter of the font in a different style. The opening titles of A Night at the Opera do something better. They have a greater mix of styles. When the same letter appears twice in a row, the letter appears in two different styles. For instance, in the names Alan Jones and Sam Wood. Harpo knocks people out by knocking them over the head. Usually in real life, for an impact to the head to knock a person out, it has to twist the neck. So I've read anyway. I have not tested this theory myself. Just after the stateroom scene, there's a shot of the ship crossing the frame from left to right, so this is supposed to be okay. But for me, this doesn't seem right. If they're going from Italy to New York, they should be crossing the screen the other way. Just look at a map. Henderson enters the apartment while Groucho is singing. In Council Podcast 29, Noah asks what this song is, if it is a known song. The other podcasters did not have an answer. I searched the Facebook group, and I don't think anyone identified it. To me, it sounds like Groucho is singing, "When the moon goes over the mountain, and the mountain goes over me." This is almost a real song that was a hit for Kate Smith in 1931. There's a Wikipedia page about the song, and it mentions Groucho singing it in A Night at the Opera. I've been keeping track of some things. According to my spreadsheet, of the first 6 surviving Marx Brothers films, A Night at the Opera and Monkey Business are the only ones in which Chico never says anything in Italian, and they're the only ones in which the dialogue has no suggestion that Harpo has red hair. The first 2 Marx Brothers films had parodies of well-known opera songs, but in this film, all the opera singing is straight, so at least there would be some entertainment value for anyone who went to this film expecting it to be about opera.
I always twist the neck and hit the head because you can never be too careful.
Well, when the moon goes over the mountain, that was cleared up back when we first, when I wondered out loud on the show about it. I don't know why those answers haven't come up in search results, and I don't remember if it was in the group or on the podcast blog, but several astute listeners like Roy Maltby did point out that is indeed the song Groucho is singing when the moon goes over the mountain. So that's cleared up. Thank you. I love all the attention. The designer in me loves all the attention our commenters are paying to the typography in the opening credits of A Night at the Opera. Great observations about the typeface in the title, the lack of repeating letters and styles. And I'm also relieved when Roy started talking about this. I was afraid maybe he removed the dot from the O in the word opera, which we all know could be disaster. So don't do that. But great comments from Roy.
Yeah, things I would never have spotted in a million years. Like Chico not saying anything in Italian or Chiccolese, I suppose we should call it.
Yeah, that's interesting, and no reference to Harpo having red hair.
What about the direction thing?
Well, yes, I think, in Hebrew you sail from right to left. It's possible a Jewish cameraman is the reason for that.
Someone told me in films where you have armies like on horseback charging towards each other, the ones you're supposed to root for always come on from the left, and the bad guys come on from the right.
Well, in politics, it sort of works that way too, right?
Yeah, right. But there's something about the flippability of film. You could reverse the film and have the boat go the other way if there's no text on the side of the boat or something.
Well,
and
the monkey's coming in a duck soup, charged to help.
Okay.
Coming from the left.
And don't you think, this wouldn't apply actually in languages that do read from right to left, but I think in left to right languages, if we're used to reading from left to right and we're used to flipping pages, in the direction we flip them, it just feels like progress when things enter from the left and head toward the right. And it feels like going backward when things enter from the right, because we're just not as used to going that way. I often find that, I don't know, well, this is a real editing thing. Bob, if you're editing footage, you must have that on your mind, whether action is entering or happening on the left or the right and what the eye does with it.
It never entered my mind till right.
I always think you could be a great editor someday.
It's like my son has these Japanese comic books which start at the back, or rather, the front is over there, and you turn the. I just can't imagine ever getting used to that. But of course, it's because his brain is so much more supple than mine because he's only 12. It's no problem for him, but I would find it really difficult.
Yeah. I remember reading that when James Cameron made Titanic, he built half the ship, and when he would film like on the other side of the ship, he would just reverse the footage so that everything would be correct. But of course, when you do that, you have to be careful about left-handed and right-handed actors using their dominant hands in scenes. You have to worry about text being backwards and other things.
That's interesting, because my grandfather worked at London Films in the 1930s in the carpentry department, and I've got loads of photos that he took, and one of them is of the galleon that was built for fire over England. And that is only a half section, and I've got photos of the other side, and it's just scaffolding, so there's only one side of it. But the side that they built is the side that would come in on the right. So maybe the observation I made that prompted all this is a load of hokum.
I suppose we have to at least face that possibility. And finally, for the last comment of this episode, what would one of our listener commentary episodes be without some thoughts from our past guest and great friend, Ms. Kathy Beale?
A Night at the Opera is the Marx Brothers at their peak, in many ways. Peak of their careers, peak box office appeal, and peak accessibility, for starters. I first saw it in a crowded theater, and the laughter of so many people fed on itself and left me physically aching by the end credits. It was my gateway drug to the Marxes, and it's probably the optimal film for introducing someone to the brothers. It's also peak comedy scenes, from the contract negotiation to the stateroom scene to the devastation of the opera stage. Yet in some ways, it's just past peak. It contains hints of decline to come, detoothing the brothers' anarchy, which previously existed for its own ineffable sake, to take up the cause of lovers. Groucho's character losing his knack for evading consequences and literally taking a fall. Harpo's ability to evade the rules of reality not saving him from being beaten by a bully. Night at the Opera is like a beautiful, alluring piece of fruit that appears to be perfectly ripened and tastes as good as you could hope. But pay closer attention, and you'll detect the first signs of brown spots and mealiness and mushy bits that will inevitably come, which doesn't make it less enjoyable. In fact, it's all the more precious to me.
Yeah, very nice. There is some mealiness and mushy bits. I particularly like the idea that they're just past their peak here. It's a very good way to describe it. Just past the peak, just barely. I mean, very close to their peak, but we have to admit, just slightly past it. The idea that it's arguably the best intro to the Marx Brothers for people who haven't seen them before. Yeah, sure, of course it is. It never occurs to me in that context. I always say Monkey Business is the best way to start. And if you ask me for a second choice, I probably would say Duck Soup or possibly Animal Crackers. But this is actually a really good way in, isn't it?
Yeah, it never occurs to me because it's the only one of their films that I think I saw at the wrong time. As I've said many times, I was incredibly fortunate that I was introduced to those four latter Paramounts first, and then I gradually caught up with the rest. Night at the Opera was the only of the really great ones that I didn't see for a long time. So I'd already seen Day at the Races. I think I'd certainly already seen At the Circus, and certainly already seen Love Happy. And it just came along. I finally caught up with it just that little bit too late, and I found it a bit underwhelming. And it's only more recently on reviewing it that I've come around to see just how good it is. And that's entirely my fault. That's the accident of when I happen to see it. So yeah, it never comes up in my mind when I think of what would be an ideal introduction. But yeah, I guess it is actually, because it gives you just enough. It's like a kind of a sampler. It's like when record labels do samplers of their artists. It's kind of a Marx Brothers sampler, and if you like it, then you're set, and you can then go on and or go backwards rather into the hardcore stuff.
Yeah, and I think depending on who you're introducing to the Marx Brothers and what their personality and taste is like, it could be a major point in this film's favor that it is so much less strange than Monkey Business, Horse Feathers, and Duck Soup. I mean, Coconuts and Animal Crackers, too, for different reasons. I mean, it's just not as unusual a movie. And you could imagine people who might very likely appreciate all that is wonderful about the Marx Brothers, but aren't used to films of a certain age or comedy of a certain stripe, just finding it a little off-putting, the relentless weirdness of those three Paramounts.
But you have to remember that the original Marx audience first discovered them with the Coconuts, which is rather conservative compared to what became later on. Maybe that was how they should be introduced, not at their wildest.
Yeah, I think you could certainly make that case, and I guess it does depend somewhat on the person who's being introduced to them. I mean, there are friends who I definitely would not start with A Night at the Opera because they would be more grabbed by Horse Feathers. But I have friends who probably would appreciate A Night at the Opera more as a way in, and maybe would appreciate Horse Feathers more after getting familiar with the style.
Being grabbed by the horse feathers sounds like a weird euphemism.
Yeah, I'd horse feather you if I had a horse feathers. We have one more comment from somebody. I forget the name. We're going to address these comments in our bonus
I don't think
segment.
he's a council member, though.
Oh, he's not a member of the council, huh?
No.
So maybe he found out about us. Maybe he follows us on Blue Sky.
Okay.
Something like that. Anyway, those of you who are subscribers to our Patreon at all paid levels are accustomed by now to receiving our monthly bonus segments. And the bonus segment that we are releasing next is another comment about A Night at the Opera from an interesting source and our comments about that comment. Subscribers can look forward to it, and non-subscribers can subscribe now and have access instantly to all 30 plus of our bonus segments. It's like getting a whole lot more. And depending on the level of your subscription, you may also be entitled to fabulous gifts like Coconut Hotel tote bags and Huxley College t-shirts, as well as at the top 4 levels, our now famous and beloved institution of the monthly Marx Brothers Council podcast postcard. The January postcard is sitting right here at my desk, actually, all stamped and addressed and ready to be dropped in a mailbox on video. So subscribers can look forward to that, and non-subscribers can get on the bandwagon anytime at marxbrotherscouncilpodcast.com or patreon.com/Marx Brothers Council Podcast.
To paraphrase Ravelli, you can't afford not to become a member.
Not becoming a member is like sentencing yourself to a lifetime of disappointment and destitution.
Noah, I've been instructed to ask you if you have any upcoming projects.
Thank you, Bob, for that completely unexpected question. Yes, I have been cooking something up that I think our listeners might be interested in. I'm just finishing up this big project. It's about to be released. It is another podcast, but I've been in the habit of referring to it as an audio series because I'm pretentious. And it's a scripted, scored, produced 7-part limited series, and it's called Pintele, Pintele. And this is about many things, organized around the story of my lifelong struggle to understand Jewish identity and what it all means being Jewish, especially for someone who is altogether now not very religious. So parts of this deal with family history. Some of it is personal history. A lot of it is about religion and philosophy and politics. And, of course, the Marx Brothers pop up in it now and then, especially in Part 4 and Part 6. It also covers some comedy topics and showbiz topics that are kind of Marx Brothers adjacent and that Marx Brothers friends will probably appreciate. Chapter 5 has a lot of material about Mel Brooks and Woody Allen and other comedy heroes. And there's a lot about the jazz singer and A.B.'s Irish Rose in Part 4. And a lot of this deals with Fiddler on the Roof, for anyone else for whom that is a tentpole. In Part 1 of Pintele, you will hear a clip of me in the role of Tevye at 12 years old, wearing a beard that I made by cutting up an elf costume. So anyway, it's a big, complicated thing. I've been working on this for about 4 years and very intensely for the last 2. It is by far the most personal and in many ways the most challenging thing I've ever done. And I'm very pleased and very scared to share it with you. So it would mean a lot to me if you would give it a try. The first episode will be released on February 12th, 2026, with a new chapter every Thursday through the end of March. So that's Pintele, Pintele. You'll be able to find it wherever you get your podcasts, and you can find lots of information and fascinating details at noahdiamond.com/Pintele.
I won't tell you what I did by cutting up an elf costume.
Maybe off the air? Actually, I'd be happy with a photograph. Well, thanks for allowing me a moment to plug my side project. Is there anything else we have to plug or say before we get to our closing music?
Not yet. Hint, hint.
No.
Heavy hint drop. Not yet.
Well, in that case, what is there to do but reflect on that magical moment when the moon goes over the mountain?
everybody. This is Kate Smith. All by myself at twilight, watching the day depart, and with a fading twilight, happiness fills my heart. When the moon comes over the mountain, every beam brings a dream, dear, of you. Once again we stroll 'neath the mountain, through that rose-covered valley we knew. Each day is gray and dreary, but the night is bright and cheery. When the moon comes over the mountain, I'm alone with my memories of you. Each day is gray and dreary, but the night is bright and cheery. When the moon comes over the mountain, I'm alone with my memories of you.
The Marx Brothers Council podcast is produced by Bob Cassell. Matthew Conium's books, including the annotated Marx Brothers, the annotated Abbott and Costello, and That's Me, Groucho, are published by McFarland. Noah Diamond's book, Give Me a Thrill, The Story of Alsatias, is published by Beer Manor Media. To leave a comment and for more info about this and all episodes, visit us at marxbrotherscouncilpodcast.com. For the latest Marx Brothers and podcast news, look for us on Blue Sky and Twitter. And join the fun with the largest and most vibrant Marx community online, a club that will have someone like you as a member. The Marx Brothers Council Facebook group. That's it for now. Mary!
That's an old face. Yeah, but she drinks like one.
Okay, now the other things about Night at the Opera, I just want to say that I admire. The stateroom scene, of course, everybody talks about. It's genius. I especially like Groucho's spirit of play. Oh, come right in. It is so crazy. And he's inviting more people into the room. He knows what's going on. He's causing this chaos. And he goes, oh, step right in. Oh, we've been waiting for you. And it was kind of like Groucho's spirit of play is so good in that scene. I would like to, this is another thing. I always kind of wanted to see Zeppo in that scene for some reason, just as a fantasy, just to see what would Zeppo have done in that stateroom. Would have been fun to see all four Marx Brothers. Now, the climax, of course, the great scene at the end was one of the greatest scenes in comedy history. Harpo's rather restrained. He's not quite as wild as he was in the first 5 films in this movie, but in the last film, he goes crazy. Harpo goes absolutely nuts, swinging in the rafters, and when he runs up the curtain, and when he runs and he slides down, he opens the door and he slides down. And also with a funny shot, not Sig Ruman, who's one of the great heavies, one of the great foils of all time, the guy that crooks his finger at Harpo. He wants Harpo there, he's on scene, and the guy with the funny hat, he like crooks his finger and tells Harpo, come here, like that. It's such a funny take. Groucho's Tarzan yell is the funniest Tarzan yell in history. I love that. I love when Groucho does the party favor and he blows the party favor at Sig Ruman's chin. And he makes him like, he goes, those things you blow at parties. He does that under Sig Ruman. That's hilarious. And I also love Groucho's boogie, boogie, boogie. Groucho is a genius. Groucho's never been better at Night at the Opera. He's great. Harpo, but Harpo and Groucho were always great. All through them. The films might have got worse, but Groucho and Harpo were always great. Night at the Opera, Chico's very good. He has good stuff, but he starts going down after that. Day at the Races is all right. And then that's kind of the end of Chico as being a funny force. But Groucho and Harpo were always funny. That's my opinion of Night at the Opera. Thank you. And thank you for the Marx Brothers podcast.